Hey guys, welcome to our final segment here of civil rights. I'm sorry, civil liberties. So we'll basically be finishing up this chapter, chapter 4, and then the expectation is starting on Monday, we'll basically move into chapter 5. Okay, so we left off talking about plea bargaining and about juries. Um, Something that I have never been a part of as a jury. I'm 48 years old. I've never been selected for jury duty. Not sure what that's about, but I don't think it has anything to say about me. So last where we left off was we said we're going to talk about cruel, unusual punishment, the Eighth Amendment. This is part of that defendant's rights aspect that your book looks at. The Eighth Amendment protects you from cruel and unusual punishments. And once again, listen to the vagueness of those terms. Cruel and unusual. What's cruel? What's unusual? And that varies over time. I'm sure if you were sitting in a classroom in the 1950s and 60s, some of the things that the teachers used to do to their students would seem as cruel and unusual. I know that even from my own upbringing, going to a very strict parochial school, what they used to do to us for punishment, you guys would be, it'd blow your minds, especially when you realize that they used to use physical punishment as part of the everyday, should we call it a teaching tool? Or the fact that basically in nearly half of the states right now, teachers are still allowed to spank their students. So what exactly is cruel and unusual? Basically changes over time, changes by communities, changes by culture. The best example that people usually use when we're discussing cruel and unusual punishment is the death penalty. Is the death penalty cruel and is it unusual? Well, there's a lot of a lot of opinion that goes into something like that. The Supreme Court, however, had ruled at one point that the death penalty is not cruel and unusual, and it basically became sanctioned within the United States. And then state by states could decide whether or not they wanted to have the death penalty within their state. The state of Wisconsin does not have the death penalty. The state of Wisconsin has never had the death penalty. But we have been having executions in the United States for quite some time, going back to the beginning of our history. So we're going to take a little look at that just to see what it's like. These are the executions around the world up until 2017, and you can see the United States is on this list, although we're nowhere near what you would see for Iran or China. But you're also looking at a list of countries that are not normally countries you want to be associated with, right? And China by far leads the world in executions, and that's not probably a good thing when they're executing over 1,000 different individuals. Here's what we look at state by state. So going back from 2014 to 2000 up to 2018, we can look at the numbers for 2019. I haven't added those on there yet, but Texas definitely leads by far the states in executing 13 people in the year 2018. Now, a lot of states, in fact, most states have the death penalty, but very few states actually use it. Very few states actually execute individuals. And the United States itself, as a country, rarely uses execution. Okay. The support for the death penalty, this is what it looks like. The light green is people who are in favor of it. The dark green are people who are against it. And right here, basically, that's that 50% line. So you can see that it's gone way up, in the 1990s or mid 90s. And right now, at least within a year or two ago, it's down to that 55% thing. The interesting thing is that when you give people a third option, and that third option being life in prison, no chance of parole, then you see the support for death penalty drop significantly. Okay. So remember, when it comes to polling, oftentimes it could be the way that the questions are worded. I'm going to share with you, this is John Oliver. This is a good one. This is John Oliver looking at not specifically the death penalty, but what was supposed to be a more humane way of conducting the death penalty, and that's lethal injection. Before lethal injection, it was things like the electric chair or gas chambers that were used to execute people in the United States. And that wasn't that long ago. We're talking about the 80s and 90s that we basically switched over to lethal injection. But there's a problem with lethal injection. A lot of problems with lethal injection. And it might not be as humane as what we think it is. And so John Oliver explores specifically the idea of lethal injection. And it's definitely a video worth watching. You should be able to click on the link up there, hopefully, and watch that video. Okay. Now, this is great. I mean, we're going to talk about the right of privacy. So literally in this little 10-minute lecture, we're going to talk about death penalty and we're going to talk about abortion. So like I said, that's one of the things that makes this class so amazing. The right to privacy. Now, the right to privacy is not explicitly stated anywhere in the Bill of Rights. And we watched an episode of The West Wing where they addressed this. Is it actually there? No, but it's implied with some of the other things that we have. But if you find a judge who basically is a constitutional judge, who basically is, a foundational judge who looks at the Bill of Rights and the Constitution based on how they were written at the time, they may not see that the right to privacy exists within the Constitution. And when we look at the right to privacy, we usually talk about abortion, right? Roe versus Wade, this is one of the Supreme Court cases that we have to learn about. 1973, the Supreme Court ruled that a state ban on abortions was unconstitutional, at least in the first two trimesters, okay? Trimester number 1 and trimester number 2. And honestly, that was kind of a game changer. And for a lot of people, it's what they basically focus on. This is one of those issues for a lot of people. This is a single issue for them. This is all they care about. They will only vote for a candidate who is pro-choice or pro-life, depending on their stance, right? Roe versus Wade is the Supreme Court case that nearly everybody has heard of. It's the most famous Supreme Court case, probably right after Brown versus the Board of Education. But honestly, the idea of Planned Parenthood versus Casey, that Supreme Court case of 1992, actually has more ramifications because Roe versus Wade basically says that it's okay for them to put some restrictions on abortion, but it can't be an undue burden. And what does that mean? Like, what kind of restrictions going to stay put on somebody receiving an abortion that would make it basically a violation of the Constitution? Can we make you come in and have a counseling session and then have to come back 24 or 48 hours later to receive the procedure? Can we force you to have a sonogram before you receive an abortion? Can we basically pass a law that requires the doctor to sit down and explain to you about the concept, about adoption as an option? Is that something that we can do? All of these little gray areas is basically what we have to figure out where exactly the line is being drawn. And now what we've seen over the last couple of years is a number of states pushing tougher and tougher abortion laws because they're looking at the Supreme Court right now, which has a majority of conservative justices on it, and they think that if they pass this through, that the Supreme Court will take a look at Roe versus Wade, at Planned Parenthood versus Casey, and they might overturn those rulings. So here's what John Oliver's going. He's got another video on this one. You don't have to watch both of them, but they're there for you if you want. Where he looks at the abortion debate, and it is kind of interesting. If you look at it, basically, 54% means 54% of the American people think that abortion should be allowed under certain circumstances. 24% think that abortion should be legal under any circumstance. Okay, 3% somehow have no opinion about abortion after all this time. Okay, and 19% believe it should be illegal in all circumstances. And what John Oliver argues is that means that a large percent of Americans, 78% of Americans, believe that abortion should be legal at least some time, right? In some cases, maybe for rape, maybe for incest, maybe when the woman's life or the child's life is at danger, those type of things. And yet, even though 78% of Americans believe that it should be allowed at least under some circumstances, we see that this 19% is very, very strong and vocal about their opinion. So this is where it gets really confusing, is each state gets to set up its own laws and regulations in regards to abortion. And I'll let you pause this and you can take kind of look at this. Every state can be different. And that's where it can become really confusing. You could be in one state which allows you to receive an abortion if you're a minor with no notification of parents or no consent of parents at all, and then that can change. So this map shows you the abortion laws in states for a minor, okay? And you can see all of the different colors and all of the different options, because it's just that complicated. So going from one state to another state, you can do that. And you might be able to have a neighboring state where abortion is more easily obtained than in your own state. So, all right, take a second if you want to look through that, and you can see all the variations there. Here's the John Oliver video that we talked about that takes a look at abortion. It's a good 18 minutes of your life to watch it. So, all right, that's the end of our presentation. If you have any questions about civil liberties, let me know. Send me an email, reach out to me in Google Classroom, and we'll work it out and figure it out, and I'll make sure I clarify anything that might have confused you on. Next week, we'll worry about next week, but next week we'll be looking at civil rights. We'll be looking at our next chapter, chapter 5. All right, we'll talk to you guys later. Stay safe, wash your hands.